Ben, tell us a little bit about your job. What's your title? What are your responsibilities here with Jekyll Island Authority?
Yeah, so I am the Director of Conservation for the Jekyll Island Authority. I started in that job in 2012, so about 8 years ago. And I've joked with my niece when she was younger, and she asked me what I did. I said, "Oh, I'm in charge of nature for Jekyll Island." And her dad, my brother-in-law, is a preacher, so she kind of raised her eyebrows a little bit. But regardless of whether you have any kind of religious beliefs or not, I think everybody should raise their eyebrows at that, right? Because anybody who really thinks they can control nature is kind of full of it. But we do our best to understand it here on Jekyll Island, and we do our best to maintain a balance between the human footprint and human activities on Jekyll and the natural element. And a large proportion of Jekyll Island is protected from development. About 2/3 of the island is protected from development. Folks who've known about Jekyll Island for a while might remember the 65-35 distinction. So it used to be that only 35% of the island could be developed. In 2014, that law was changed to be based on acreage rather than percent. And so proportionally it's about the same, but it's a fixed acreage cap. You can't develop more than 1,675 acres of Jekyll Island.
How many acres?
We're at 1,612 now. So we're close to that cap, and that's about 1/3 of the island, approximately.
Okay.
Yeah, give or take, depending on how you measure the island, which is why they got away from the percentage-based approach, because folks would debate that for a long time.
Yeah.
So in short, my job and the job of the other folks that work in our conservation program here is to do our best to understand everything that's going on, both in the natural world and the human world, and try to manage what's going on in the developed portion of the island, so that it's as accommodating as it can be for wildlife and nature within that footprint, but even more importantly, so it doesn't have negative impacts on the natural areas. To look for opportunities to restore places and aspects of the island that may have been degraded by past decisions, past development decisions or otherwise. And so we do some monitoring of wildlife and plants and water quality, and what you think of as more traditional land management, conservation management type responsibilities. But one of the things that I think I do that's most important is, when decisions are made on Jekyll that affect the direction we're going on the island with the human element here, development or otherwise, I get to be at the table as the voice for conservation. And Jekyll Island has a lot of different things going on. Jekyll Island Authority, who I work for, we operate a campground, we operate a water park, we operate golf courses, we operate a restaurant. So it's a very diverse organization that is in part a conservation organization, but not entirely a conservation organization. This convention center that we're sitting in, the authority is responsible for. And so balancing all those things, communicating with the people that are responsible for those other elements of the authority, and getting everybody on the same page and reading from the same sheet of music as far as our conservation responsibilities is an important, very important that conservation voice is at the table.
There's a new hotel being built south of the pier. What role did JIA have in the early phases of that planning? Did you have any say-so in some of the construction or certain components that they had to address and make sure they addressed?
Yeah, so that's a good example. So that is, and most everything you see out here that's new appears to be new, and there's a lot of that.
Right.
Is redevelopment in one form or another. So in the case that you mentioned, there was historically a hotel on that piece of land, it was famous for having a swimming pool shaped like the state of Georgia. And a lot of hotels out here failed kind of during the financial collapse, Great Recession period, and that was one of them. So that the former hotel on that site was torn down around 2008, and it's been vacant ever since. But so all of the land out here is public land, and so commercial properties like that, a private interest owns the building, but they lease the land from the state through the Jekyll Island Authority. And so even though the building was torn down, the land was still leased and held by a commercial interest over the intervening years when it sat vacant. And so they were waiting for the right time in the market to come back in with the business. So when that time came and they were ready to move forward with building a hotel, the development group had to go through a review process. And so we have a design review process and we have an environmental review process. I coordinate and lead the environmental review process. And in the case of a project like that, it's also integrated into that design review process. And so on the environmental side, we convene a committee. We call it the Environmental Assessment Procedure, or EAP. So we convene an EAP committee that involves some folks like myself who work for the Jekyll Island Authority, and then some external stakeholders to come in and give us some advice, including a representative from DNR.
So DNR.
We typically have a representative from some part of DNR, depending on the project. That might be a different part of DNR. We try to have a representative from the Jekyll community, a resident of Jekyll Island. We look for topical expertise, so if somebody's got a particular background in the project that's being looked at, in the case of a hotel, maybe engineering or something like that, that could be helpful. And so in that case, there's some big gets, I would say, that came through that environmental review and design review process. One is the hotel is 30 feet further back from the ocean than it was originally proposed to be. So that's important with some of the major hurricanes that we seem to be seeing more frequently. And then another one is a large proportion of the parking area is going to be pervious paving. And so that helps with stormwater management and keeping nutrient pollution or other polluted stormwater runoff out of the wetlands.
What about turtles?
So that hotel happens to be on one of the most heavily used sea turtle nesting areas of the Jekyll Island beach. So a very important consideration. They do have to comply with a beachfront lighting ordinance that we have. That's a local ordinance specific to Jekyll Island that's in effect from May 1st through October 31st. And at the time that that property was going into its getting into the sort of detailed design, we were also going through an update of the beach lighting ordinance, which I was leading, and I think that had some good side effects in that it raised the profile of that ordinance and kind of elevated it so it was in the forefront of everybody's minds that's working on this project and in their minds. And so they're still doing some back and forth with DNR, Wildlife Conservation Section, on the details of their lighting plan, but they do have to get that approved by DNR, the lighting plan specifically. So you can't, and exterior lights in the building will have to be shielded so you can't see them directly. They have to be long wavelength light, meeting a certain wavelength standard that means it's less likely to disturb turtles, that sort of thing. But it's challenging, because you do need light to operate any kind of space that people use. And so, that's some challenges that the convention center here and the events that utilize this facility have to deal with as well.
What are some of the other big challenges you have working with JIA that, just in general as an organization, dealing with transient population that come in for a weekend or a week and they don't live here, they don't, maybe not even part of the Georgia residents, but so what are some of these challenges, and what would students at Warnell in an undergraduate program in Parks, Rec, and Tourism need to do to kind of prepare for the career down this path?
Yeah, that's a great question.
The challenges and then preparation for that. That's
a great question. And the first thing I'm going to say maybe is kind of abstract, but I think it's important, and it took me a while to realize this, but it's human nature that we all have some degree of feeling entitled about our footprint in the environment, and everybody has different perspectives and different justifications for that, and some may be more valid than others, I don't know, but we all have it. And so you see that whether it's tourists going on vacation, and I think we all have a tendency to feel sort of entitled to be relaxed when we're on vacation. That's reasonable. You can't blame anybody for that, right? But being relaxed means you're a little bit less mindful of your impact. If you're running a business, you have a sense of entitlement to do what you need to do to make some money. If you're, even if you're doing wildlife monitoring and research, you might have a sense that you're entitled to maybe do some things that the average Joe or Jane might not be able to do to access the animals in the area that you're trying to study. Anybody that's trying to get a job done around the island, cutting grass, trimming landscaping, there's certain things that you're used to being able to do, and if somebody comes in and says, hey, I don't think you should do it that way, I think you should do it a little bit differently, that tends to grate on us, and so figuring out strategies to connect with people to get past that initial sense of why are you trying to tell me what to do? This is my deal. That's hugely challenging. Maybe a little bit less abstract, more concrete, I think, just in terms of impacts on the ecology here and managing that. Fragmentation is probably the biggest one. So when the island was first developed, there were areas where not enough thought was given to, well, if we put a road here and don't connect the wetlands on either side of it, maybe there was an assumption that wasn't going to be bad, and we know now, particularly in some specific cases, that's had some severe impacts on water quality and habitat value. And roads, just even with the speed limits, there's no speed limit on Jekyll Island is over 35, but roads just kill wildlife. Absolutely. No matter what. And so that's one thing I think is hugely important going forward, is no new roads on Jekyll. And that's something I'd stand up for sure. Look into the future, climate change is a huge factor and that we need to be prepared for and adapt to and do our best to mitigate. Something that amplifies every other stress that's out there in the environment for wildlife and plants and plant communities.
I was really surprised to see the 4-H center not built a little higher. If you'd seen how much dirt they brought in, you might feel a little bit better about it. So they did build it up to 14 feet. Okay. Which is, in that part of the island especially, I think is very important. So they brought in truckload after truckload of dirt, and so the base elevation is 14 feet, which is actually pretty good. That was interesting though, because if they had built it a year later, when the FEMA flood maps changed, they wouldn't have done that, because the way the flood maps changed here,
they actually reduced the elevation that you have to build to in certain locations, and that would have been one of them. So we were lucky that happened when and how it did.
Absolutely.
So.
Wait, looking back, what would you have liked to have known in your preparation for such a position that you have now, in terms of whether it be training or education or volunteer experience or something like that, that you feel like it might have equipped you better? Not to say that you're not doing a wonderful job, but like, as I said in the question, you know, if I only knew then what I know now, like Bob
Right.
Seeger said. I just
Right.
wondered if there was anything that maybe you could speak to that.
Yeah, that's a great question. I think when I started my job here, I was kind of naive in that, you know, I thought, all right, great, I've landed kind of a senior management position in this organization. I'm the director of conservation. I report to the executive director. I'm really going to have some pull and really be able to just walk right in and you know, make some decisions and tell people how it needs to be. And it really doesn't work like that. You know, the title, and even where the title sits in the organizational structure, is very far from the most important thing. The most important thing is relationships and trust, right? And
Yeah.
so, and that takes time to develop, and you don't have it when you walk in the door. So I think it was, you know, a few years before, you know, my boss and I developed the rapport and got to know each other well enough and earned each other's trust and developed that working relationship that we really started clicking and being able to play off each other to really get things done more efficiently.
Yeah.
And that goes for sort of parallel relationships with other, you know, senior management. So sometimes I'll compare it to kind of a sports team. You know, I mean, it's not going to matter if you're the team captain if, you know, your other starting players don't anticipate what you're about to do next and have good communication with you and trust that you're going to be there when they need you.
That's a good point.
So that had to be learned.
Sure.
But, yeah.
You mentioned that you do work with DNR as stakeholders in these environmental assessment planning meetings and teams. And what are some of the other partners, and just describe kind of how you interact with others besides DNR? Who are the other big players here with Jekyll Island Authority in terms of stakeholders?
Yeah, absolutely. DNR is one of the most important. I'm fortunate to sit on the Coastal Resources Division's Advisory Council, and so we have a great relationship with them. Georgia Sea Grant, University of Georgia Marine Extension would be another one. You know, academic partners, Cornell, of course, the ICON program at UGA we've had several really top-notch PhD students that have done work on Jekyll through the ICON program.
That's great.
You know, NGO partners like Georgia Conservancy, the Audubon Society, Nature Conservancy, and federal partners, Army Corps of Engineers, NOAA, and so I think we're real fortunate on the Georgia coast to have a lot of really top-notch professionals if you don't know how to get something done, or how to pull the resources to get something done, there's a lot of people to reach out to help that have the skills and the resources.
So JIA is a state agency.
Yeah, Jekyll Island Authority is an authority of the state of Georgia. So we're under that state umbrella. You know, you might say we're kind of out on the edge of it there. Maybe, you know, the university system might be out there too. You know, but DNR maybe a little bit more in the middle.
Okay.
But yeah, we're part of the state government. I'm a state employee.
Are there other authorities like JIA throughout the state, or is this one of a kind?
There's just a couple others. So so we're Jekyll Island State Park, which is distinct from the rest of the state park system of Georgia, which is managed by DNR. And there's only 2 other state parks in Georgia like that: Stone Mountain and Lanier Islands.
Okay.
And so they both have their own state park authorities. Our full legal name is the Jekyll Island State Park Authority. We don't use that much because, 1, it's kind of long and unwieldy, and 2, we want to try to avoid that confusion between, well, you're a state park, but I thought DNR manages that.
Yeah.
So, but both Lanier Islands and Stone Mountain are a little bit different, just in how they've evolved, in that they are smaller organizations. They employ less people because I think they do more with contracting and subcontracting some of their services.
Yeah.
Whereas, like I mentioned earlier, we actually directly operate the water park and the golf course and the campground,
Right.
and do the landscaping of the grounds and the conservation. So we have, in the summer season, when we staff up with seasonal employees, we have between 300 and 400 people on staff. Yeah.
So is that an opportunity for Warnell students to come work for you?
Hey, definitely get in touch, and I encourage people to reach out and do informational interviews and learn about what we're doing, and keep an eye on our job board to see about opportunities. The number of people working in the conservation department is not in the hundreds, but we do have opportunities, and we have since we established the program in 2012 with just me on staff. We have been growing to the point where now we have 4 full-time folks, and then 3 seasonal beach park rangers that we'll bring in to help us on the island and the busy months. And then we have an AmeriCorps program, so we'll have AmeriCorps members working with us, 3 of them at any given time during the year. So yeah, there's definitely opportunities. The AmeriCorps program is an excellent program to build experience and do some service through conservation for the community.
That's right.
Really encourage folks come in between undergrad and grad school to take a look at that.
Yeah.
Last year when we were here, Joseph met with us and mentioned in his presentation the potential for getting rid of a golf course, and you talked about fragmentation on this island, roads, but existing structures and the influence on habitat. Has there been any change in that, or is that closing of a golf course occurred, still in the discussions?
Yeah.
Or has it been nixed because somebody said, no, I want to play golf?
No, it's an exciting opportunity. So that we've been going through a master plan for the future of golf on Jekyll, and that's nearing completion. Was just getting started around the time you heard about it from Joseph, our wildlife biologist, last year. And the plan will recommend that we take a substantial amount of acreage out of golf, including about 80 acres that is recommended to be allocated to conservation and passive outdoor recreation uses. And that's really exciting because it's that 80 acres is mainly in 2 chunks on what is now parts of 2 different golf courses. There's currently 64 holes of golf on Jekyll, which is a lot. Apparently people were really enthusiastic about golf in the 60s and 70s, a little more so than they are now. And so we're maintaining more than is financially sustainable right now. And so we need to dial that back, improve the golf that's left, and do good things for the public with the remainder. And so that's what this 80 acres would be about. And one of those 2 areas was part of, before they built the golf there, was part of one of the largest freshwater wetland systems on the island. And about a third at least of that was basically buried under the golf course. And so there's an opportunity to restore this wetland system. And then the other area is in a portion of the island where there's two roads that cross over the middle of the island, Shell Road and Captain Wiley Road, that run east-west. It's only two east-west roads across the island. In between those two roads is basically wall-to-wall golf course. And so, thinking about fragmentation, right? We've got this big barrier, two roads with manicured, golf course in between. That is a barrier for a lot of different kinds of wildlife, more so some than others.
Yeah.
Joseph might have talked about it in terms of the rattlesnake population, which we know from genetic data is not connected between the south end of the island and the north end of the island. So as part of this plan, we're establishing a wildlife corridor. We will be establishing a wildlife corridor of natural habitat between those two roads. Exactly what that's going to look like, that's will be part of the scope of further planning beyond the golf plan. But it's really exciting opportunity.
Let me be the devil's advocate though.
Yeah.
So you talked about 65-35 traditional.
Yeah.
We consider it a finite pie, right?
Yeah.
Zero-sum game. If 80 acres go back into the 65, then where do 80 acres go to the 35?
Yeah. So that's a really important discussion, right? And so the question to rephrase it is if we restore, currently it's golf, it's classified as developed. It's part of the total of that 1,612 acres that's classified as developed. So if you were to restore it and then reclassify it as undeveloped land, then that would open up the possibility of more development elsewhere. It would lower, it would increase the remainder of the acreage that could theoretically be available for development on the island. That doesn't sound like a good thing to me. Right now the leadership of the island, is not out looking to attract new development to come in and take advantage of an opportunity like that. But who knows what the environment, the atmosphere of that sort of thing will be like down the road. So you need to think about it.
Get legislation changed.
Yeah.
So that it limits, instead of the 1,600, now all of a sudden it's.
So that's one thing you could do, and we don't know where we're going with that yet, and a lot of discussions still need to be had, and we need to hear from a lot of people on it, partners and stakeholders and that sort of thing. One thing I have thought about, and this is just my thought at this point, is if we left it, even though we're restoring the ecology, right? If we keep it classified as developed, then that takes some of that pressure off. And another thing that's being discussed in very preliminary, at a very preliminary level internally, we don't know if this is happening or not, but we're thinking about setting greenhouse gas reduction targets for the island and a timeline for doing that. So trying to figure all that out. So if you worked out your greenhouse gas reduction plan and your carbon budget for the island such that you gave yourself some credit for not, for basically sequestering carbon through ecology on land that's classified as developed. Probably wouldn't use everything, right? Because if you count all the marsh and everything, you'd probably be carbon negative now, and that wouldn't be fair. So give yourself some credit on the land that's classified as developed, and that gives you an incentive to keep land classified as developed, but also to have it be green and have it sequester carbon.
What about like multi-use greenways or beltline
Yeah.
systems where that would stay, I guess you could consider it developed, but
Right.
it would be like those surfaces where there wouldn't be the leaching into the soil, or
Right.
there still could be wildlife passageways or ways in which they could get across that it wouldn't be a detriment.
Seems
Yeah.
like if it's green space for the public to use, to me that's developed as green space. It's not developed as in a structure or a
Right.
parking lot,
Right.
but it's created for a particular purpose, and it's not just left alone to Mother Nature's way.
Right.
It's developed in quotation marks,
Right.
in my opinion.
Right.
You don't want to be redundant though, because there is, from what we can surmise, there's a loop that goes around a good part of this part, in which bikes are already used.
It's kind of a
so-
figure eight in a way, right? You got two, you got the north loop and the south loop that is
Yeah.
all connected down here with the
Yeah.
roundabout.
Yeah. And we have, we currently have a fair amount of natural area in places that's
Mhm.
that's within the developed footprint.
Yeah.
One in particular that I'm kind of proud of is a condo development project. It's associated with the marina here. That hasn't been built yet. They just broke ground a few months ago and then paused the project with everything that's been going on with the pandemic. But that's another one that we reviewed through our EAP, environmental assessment procedure, and through that process, we were able to negotiate a wildlife corridor. So a portion of that property that's on lease, so it's classified as developed. They're paying us for the land, but it's in the lease agreement that they're not allowed to develop this portion of it because it's a wildlife corridor. And so it's a legally defined and legally delineated and legally binding wildlife corridor. And so, if they hadn't wanted to develop it at all, that would have been better. But they held the lease on it. They had some rights to do something with it. They had been paying us, to have those rights, and so that was a pretty good win, considering what the possibilities might have been otherwise.
There's a lot of complex situations that we, as armchair, quarterbacks, sit here from the outside trying to say, well, you should do this or do that. But
Yeah.
it seems like when you add different layers to it, and you get a lot of different stakeholders involved.
Yeah,
Much like anything else, it gets a lot more.
yeah,
It's like the blooming onion. You start peeling it back, and you can really start seeing where people's true colors are. So I just thought I would add that in terms of the complexity of how what you do here is a great thing, and it's such a unique environment that it's almost like a private-public partnership in essence, where you've got some of the developing areas.
Yeah.
So commend you for.
yeah. I think it's a great, it's a great model that, it's be hard for municipalities, local governments to adopt it exactly.
Sure.
But if there were more local governments that had specific development limitations, and had a conservation professional, in the inner circle advising the chief executive, I think you'd see a lot better outcomes in terms of conservation.
So to kind of wrap this up, Ben, what would be your advice for students at Warnell that are wanting to pursue a similar career like you have, in terms of training, volunteering with organizations, soft skill development, networking? What's your sage advice for young professionals wanting to build a career in what we do as resource managers?
Oh, I think there's no silver bullet or no perfect recipe for it, but just getting out there and getting to know people as best you can, and learning from people who are in these type of jobs, whether that be Georgia Department of Natural Resources, Jekyll Island Authority, Nature Conservancy, so many good organizations and talented professionals out there, and projecting confidence, but that fine line between not seeming overconfident, but projecting confidence nonetheless. And just feeling your way through it, and I think as you move along and your career advances, it's so important to remember where you came from and remember how you got there. Even at the early career stages, there's people that aren't far behind you that you might be able to help up. And making sure we all do our part to preserve the career path that got us to where we are, and just remembering that none of us do our jobs without a lot of help from a lot of people, and so that means don't hesitate to ask for help when you need it, and be quick to offer help when somebody needs it from you. And that's becomes very important in the academic environment, especially as you get into grad school, and then even more important in the career environment beyond that.
I have one last question, and I'll let Dr. Woosnam finish up. But if you were to recommend a book or a few books that maybe help guide your own philosophy about resource management or conservation of natural resources, who comes to mind? Who's the author, or what book title?
Oh, I'm gonna have to get out my phone real quick to make sure I remember the name of it.
Yeah, that's okay.
Okay.
That's sure.
You can edit the phone checking part out of it.
No, this is real.
Have you heard of Conservation X Labs?
No, I haven't.
So that's an organization that was started by a guy, Alex Deegan, I think is his name. And he wrote this amazing book about his work in Afghanistan. Book is called The Snow Leopard Project and Other Adventures in War Zone Conservation. The author is Alex Deegan, or Dagan, Dehgan. And it's an awesome read. Is working with, I believe, the Wildlife Conservation Society, or maybe World Wildlife Fund, one of the big international NGOs, right? That went into Afghanistan fairly early after the war began in Afghanistan, and the U.S. got involved there. And there was a period of time where the situation was relatively stable before it heated back up again. Mm-hmm. And some of the international NGOs went in at that time and established themselves and were trying to shape the future of conservation in Afghanistan, given that there's been this major disturbance and anticipated to be kind of a reinvention of government and trying to influence the trajectory of conservation early on and all that. And so they were trying to establish like a national park system in Afghanistan, but it's a war zone and there's no baseline of data, just a few studies here and there from decades ago. And so they've got to go in and figure out, how are we going to learn enough about where the priority wildlife are, what are the threats and stresses, what is the political landscape that could potentially make a national park in this place or the other possible or not possible, and get people out doing that kind of work in a very dangerous place. And he led all that, and ended up, I think 3 national parks were established based on the work that they did. And so it just really opens your eyes that no matter where you're working, right, compared to that, doing conservation on Jekyll Island is not very hard,
No bombs or bullets.
Yeah, not that challenging. But so it could always be harder, no matter what you're doing. But even if it isn't, you have to be bold and aim high in what you're seeking to accomplish. and work really hard at it, and realize that sometimes, especially if you're find yourself in a leadership position, and especially if you're in an organization that or a context where you're a conservation voice in a room that's not purely about conservation. If you're the only conservation person at the table, you have to be able to recognize the situations that come up where if you say something and you say it persuasively, things are going to happen differently in a way that's a better outcome for conservation and hopefully a better outcome for people. And if in those same circumstances, if you don't say anything, or you say the wrong thing, or you're not persuasive enough, it's not going to go that way. And that's a really important skill to hone, is to recognize those situations where it's really on you, and you need to be bold, and you need to be confident, and you need to speak with a strong voice and hope that others listen.
Honestly, those last 2 points were very much sage wisdom, and so I don't think I could ask any questions to add more to what you've already contributed. Honestly, for your experience and your position, I just think you have a great outlook on the way things are going here, and so we're really appreciative of your insight, and especially the unique environment that you're working in, to be able to have the approach that you take. It's really
Thanks a lot.
insightful.
Appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you again.
Appreciate you guys coming out today.
Yeah.